Hi, this is Tom Fitteman, and I want to use a simple epidemic model to explore this article from the BBC News about whether the coronavirus spread might be different in the UK than it is in Italy. You can grab a copy of the model that I'm going to use and run it for yourself at metasd.com. The first claim in the article is that the UK epidemic is lagging Italy. Okay, does that matter? Let's look at the model. So this is my model parameterized for Bozeman, Montana vaguely, but it really doesn't matter. The disease parameters are the same everywhere. The incubation time, the recovery time, the reproduction ratio or R0, uh, those are all the same. Of course, there are some differences in the real world just due to different geography, different social behavior, and things like that. But those seem to be fairly minor with respect to coronavirus. So here I have Italy and the UK set up as essentially identical hypothetical countries. Um, the way this model works is you have susceptibles getting exposed to the disease. After an incubation period, they're actively infected and infectious, and then they recover, and hopefully only a few die. But the process is kicked off by the import of some infected people from another region. Uh, so, what does it mean to lag another country? Perhaps because you were just lucky, or perhaps because you closed the borders sooner, or simply have less connectivity to infected regions. That's like importing those infections later. So in my base case, and what we'll call Italy here, I import 3 infections on day 10. So let's suppose that the UK is a couple of weeks behind. So we'll import those infections on day 30 or so. So what does that do? Well, not a lot. So if you look at the red trajectory here is Italy uh, peaking uh, in early June, and here's the blue line is the UK now peaking at the end of June. Uh, so this is actually not very surprising. Essentially, by delaying the import of infected, we've introduced a lag in the epidemic, but that hasn't changed the qualitative behavior one bit. We still get a peak at around 20% of the population infected, and we have a horrifying number of deaths, and our public health system and hospital system are dramatically overstressed by the the course of the epidemic. Um, so changing the introduction of the infection or introducing a lag is really no cause for hope at all. All we've done is shift the behavior of the system in time. We haven't changed the structure of the epidemic at all. So the key feature of an epidemic is that this red feedback loop here, which says that if you have more infected people, more of them are out there infecting the population. You get more new infections. That produces more exposed asymptomatic people. After a lag, they advance, become infectious themselves, and the cycle continues. So it's really this vicious cycle of infection that we need to stop. Having a lag doesn't do anything for that process, except it buys you a little bit of time to get ready for what else is to come. But ultimately, the catastrophe unfolds in exactly the same way. So I think that piece of speculation from the BBC is at best not very exciting news, and at worst dangerous if it induces people to be complacent. The second claim in the article is that the epidemic is more concentrated in Italy, and it certainly looks that way on the map with a big cluster here. But look again at this exponential behavior you see. While the epidemic is growing, the number of infected people has sort of this hockey stick shape. So any location that's early in its growth process is going to look pretty small compared to a point that is late in the process of growth. So a few clusters that get started early are naturally going to look much bigger when you plot their bubbles on the map. But that doesn't mean the other clusters aren't sort of hard on their heels, just still down in the flat part of the hockey stick. Um, so it's not clear that that's cause for celebration either. And actually, if you look at the UK map, here's the less concentrated view of things. Uh, Actually, I would in some ways be concerned because it indicates that the disease is highly dispersed even while the overall infection level is small. So that could suggest actually that the connectivity and mobility of people in the UK is actually higher than it is in Italy, which means that ultimately the disease is going to arrive in a more concentrated fashion in the country. Uh, so this is not good either. They might be different from Italy, but not in a good way. Okay, let's look at the third claim. Third is that more of Italy's confirmed cases are fatal. Uh, well, that may be true, but I think it's extremely hard to know. Uh, and again, the feedback of the situation kind of suggests that this might be an illusion. So there are really two problems. So one is that early in the epidemic, your information about deaths and recovered people is extremely sketchy due to lags in reporting, limited testing, and the fact that people who ultimately die are more serious cases that take longer to resolve than the milder cases who recover fairly quickly. So again, there's every reason to think that uh, there might actually be little or no underlying difference between Italy and the UK on this metric. And actually, it's potentially even worse than this, as if you imagine that this lag scenario is correct, that somehow the disease was introduced later to the UK effectively or in smaller numbers initially. Um, what that means is the strain on the public health system, which is now at critical levels in Italy, has not yet reached critical levels in the UK. But if you look at the fatality rate, here's what's happening in the model. The fatality rate in Italy spikes when the caseload of serious cases exceeds the number of hospital beds and ventilators and other key resources that you need to keep people alive. Um, so right now, the uh, hypothetical Italy does have a much higher death rate in the model than the hypothetical UK. But look what's coming. The exact same behavior is going to play out in our hypothetical UK as the spread of the disease becomes wider and the healthcare system collapses under the strain. So again, this is no cause for celebration either. Um, so what would make things better? Well, really, the crucial thing is to have a robust public health response that can delay things, but again, it too gets overwhelmed. And even more critical than that is to have a scalable, robust behavioral response in the general population, social distancing, hand washing, and everything else that you need to do in order to shut down this vicious cycle, this reinforcing feedback loop that drives the infection. That is the only way you're going to get the course of the disease to be fundamentally different in the UK. The great thing about this is it's essentially a bottom-up strategy. The people can implement it without any top-down guidance or resources. It'll be disruptive, but so will thousands of deaths. Um, and if there's ever a country that could rise to this occasion, it's the one that produced Newton's foundational discoveries in calculus and optics and gravitation out of the Great Plague of London. Best of luck.